Tu Tien sat quietly by the window, the soft sunlight filtering through the leaves outside, creating a serene scene. Her heart was filled with emotion, part of it happiness knowing she was carrying two little lives inside her, and part of it anxiety about how to tell her father. Since the moment Tu Tien found out she was pregnant with twins, she had been thinking about how she would tell her father, wondering if he would accept it and feel joyful. Her father was a strict and firm man, but he had always loved her deeply, protecting and caring for her in every way. Finally, Tu Tien decided she couldn't delay any longer. She walked out of her room and into the living room, where her father was sitting. He was reading the newspaper, looking calm yet still exuding that typical serious demeanor. Tu Tien gently sat down across from him, her mind racing with thoughts. "Dad, I have something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly but with determination. Her father folded the newspaper, his eyes focusing on her, his face calm but his gaze filled with concern. "What is it, dear?" he asked, his voice warm but with a touch of seriousness. Tu Tien took a deep breath, her anxiety and nervousness growing. "Dad, I'm pregnant," she said slowly, watching his reaction carefully. He was silent for a moment, his brows furrowing slightly, but he didn't speak right away. The atmosphere in the room suddenly felt tense. Tu Tien could see the conflict in his eyes, between the joy of knowing his daughter was going to have a child and the worries about the future. "You're pregnant with Jack's child?" he asked, his voice measured, his eyes searching hers. Tu Tien nodded. "Yes, Dad. Jack and we've been in love, and now I'm pregnant with twins," she continued, her eyes fixed on her father, waiting for his response. Her father sat still, his eyes deep in thought. After a few seconds he sighed, but it wasn't a sigh of disapproval or anger. It was a sigh of acceptance and also a father's concern. He stood up, walked over to Tu Tien, and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "My dear, I've always loved and supported you. If you're happy with your choice, then I'll stand by you," he said, his voice now warmer. "But you also need to think about the responsibility, about your future and the future of your children. Jack is a good man, but marriage and parenthood aren't easy. I hope you'll be strong and find happiness in your decision." Tu Tien was overwhelmed with emotion, surprised by how calm and understanding her father was. The worries in her heart seemed to melt away after hearing his words. She nodded, tears of happiness streaming down her face. After the conversation with her father, Tu Tien felt much lighter. She decided it was time to share this wonderful news with Jack. The next day, when Jack came home from work, she was ready. She looked at Jack, the man she loved, the one who had been by her side through so many ups and downs, and her heart was filled with joy. "Jack, I have something to tell you," Tu Tien said as they sat down together. Jack looked at her, his eyes lighting up when he heard the unusual tone in her voice. "What is it, honey?" he asked, his concern evident. Tu Tien took his hand, her eyes brimming with happiness. I'm pregnant. And not just one, but twins." The moment he heard those words, Jack froze for a second. He stared at her in disbelief, But then a smile slowly spread across his face, growing into a joyous laugh. He stood up, pulled Tu Tien into a tight embrace, and spun her around in sheer excitement. Really, honey? Twins. We're going to have 2 babies. Jack practically shouted, his voice filled with joy. I can't believe it. This is the best news I've ever heard. He placed his hands on her belly, his eyes filled with deep happiness. We're going to be a big family, and I'll do everything to protect you and our babies. Both of them were overwhelmed with happiness. Jack couldn't wait to share the news with his mother. He knew she would be overjoyed to hear that she was going to be a grandmother of twins. The next day, Jack went home and immediately sought out his mother. She was sitting in the living room, focused on knitting. When Jack entered, she looked up at him with a warm, loving gaze. "Mom, I have some exciting news to tell you," Jack said, trying to keep his cool but unable to hide the joy on his face. His mother stopped what she was doing, looking at him curiously. "What is it, son?" she asked, her eyes full of interest. Jack smiled, then slowly said, "Tu Tien, she's pregnant. And guess what, Mom? It's twins." His mother's eyes widened in shock, but then her face lit up with pure joy. She put down her knitting, stood up, and hugged Jack tightly. "Oh my goodness, son. This is the best news I've ever heard. Twins. I can't believe it. I'm going to have 2 grandchildren." She beamed, tears of happiness sparkling in her eyes. Jack laughed heartily, overjoyed to see his mother so happy. "Yes, Mom. We're going to have 2 babies, and I can't wait for them to be born." His mother held his hands tightly, her eyes full of love. "I'm so happy for you and Tu Tien. You 2 will be wonderful parents. I can't wait to meet your babies." The 3 of them were all immersed in joy and happiness, filled with hope for the future with their growing family. Jack and Tu Tien knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would overcome them together, with love, the support of family, and the 2 little ones who would soon join them on this wonderful journey.